So every group's done this, so we have to interview some people. So yeah, let's get straight to it, I guess.
Okay.
I've got a bunch of questions. What are the most popular tourist destinations in Brisbane that you know?
In Brisbane, okay. Well, obviously South Bank. So South Bank's incredibly popular because not many cities have a beach and a swimming area like that, and then all the other things that are around it. And then of course, because of where it is there, it's located near QPAC and the museum and the cultural centre. So in a sense, you have a whole area on the south side of the river that is incredibly popular. And of course, most of that is free too. So it is popular. Obviously, Mount Cootha. So you can see it out the window here. So that's where you can get a great view of the city. So and of course, as a major city, shopping is always a big thing. So places like the mall, Queen Street Mall, and and the high-end shops and that in the city. So they're probably the key things in the city.
Okay, cool. Around how well known as a city do you think Brisbane is to the world?
Known?
Like as a sort
probably
of
not
a tourist destination?
Yeah. I mean, I think who was it? One of the whether it was Lonely Planet or something. Just you could Google this, but Brisbane just came out. I think number 8 is one of the I think the word was one of the best looking or one of the prettiest cities in the world. I think it came out as number 8 or something. Behind the obvious ones like New York and Paris and those sorts of things, and ahead surprisingly of Sydney and Melbourne and whatever. So that was a bit of a surprise. Look. It's nowhere near as well known as the obvious places like London, New York and Paris. But, you look at New York, I mean, they get, they've got a population of 8.5 million people, and they get 54 million visitors. Brisbane gets 6.2. So, we're only a tenth of the sort of numbers. So, but we're getting better known. Okay, cool.
Do you know what sort of makes a place a tourist attraction?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. I work one of the areas I work in is in experience development, and what that means is it's about understanding the sense of place of a location, and it's not about trying to be something that you're not. Now, if you look at somewhere like Las Vegas, it builds its own Eiffel Tower and recreates things, and it's like a living fun park sort of thing. Whereas cities need to understand what their point of difference is, what makes them different. So in the case of Brisbane, it's a subtropical city, so it's an outdoor sort of city. We shouldn't be trying for too long. We tried to, compete with Sydney or compete with Melbourne, whatever. We're a different city. We have a different climate. It is very much an outdoor city, so it is about the outdoors. It is about our subtropical climate. And it's about building on those strengths. We have a great river, so it's about using that more and more. And you would see that 20 years ago, most of Brisbane turned its back on the river, and it was a case of kept away from it. Of course, now you've got boats and city cats and everybody, and the city's now facing the river. So it's about going with your strength, and it is a subtropical climate.
And
great outdoors, the river, open space. Yeah, that's right, And that should be reflected then in the architecture and things like that. It hasn't always been the case, but we're seeing more of that now.
Okay. What do you know, like maybe the average amount of international people that probably visit Brisbane per year?
You mean the numbers? Well, I can leave you a number of different reports here that Sharon put aside, but there's the statistics for Brisbane, so you'll be able to have those. But as I said, 6.2 million visitors, and of those, 997,000. So roughly nearly 1 million of those visitors are international, and the rest are domestic. But all those stats that you need are in there.
Thank you. Do you know if there's any sort of special deals for tourists? Like, I'm just giving this as an example, like one pass, you pay like $20 and it gets you around South Bank everywhere or something like that?
Yeah, no, look...
Is Brisbane offering any sort of...
Yeah, there's things like that. They've tried to do it with the public transport, so there is tourists can get, because we all have go-karts and things like that now, and it's not really that easy for people to have a go-kart sort of thing. So I think, on the public transports with the trains and the buses, there's a pass that they can get. And of course, various businesses often come together and then provide deals. Like if you come to me, you'll get 10% off here. So look, there are deals going all the time for tourists in terms of, buy this ticket and you go to 3 different destinations. But that's not so much controlled by any government or anything. That's really up to business to make those decisions of how they will work together and offer deals to tourists.
Okay. Cool.
But things like, I should throw in, like Brisbane has its Brisbane Greeters program. And if you haven't looked that up on the, just look up Brisbane Greeters and I think you'll get it on the Brisbane marketing website. But that's people who take walks around Brisbane, and I think they're free. And they're about, showing people the things they wouldn't normally see, take them to buildings and then tell the story about those buildings. So, and it's very much aligned, New York does that, London does that, so Brisbane's got the Brisbane Greeters. So that's a program that's there about looking after tourists.
Cool. Do you think the tourism infrastructure in Brisbane could be classed as well known, or?
I think the problem with Brisbane is we don't have a harbour bridge and we don't have an opera house.
Like an iconic...
Yeah, we don't have an iconic man-made structure that, like the Eiffel Tower or whatever, that becomes a must-see. The river is a great asset to have, but it's not something you ever travel around the world to see,
Yeah.
And the same as Mount Cootha and those sort of things. So when you don't have something that's iconic, you then need to start looking at how do you create a sense of, because it isn't always about something being iconic. Yes, you want to go to Paris to see the Eiffel Tower, but Paris is so much more. It is about the boulevards, it's about seeing painters, it's about the way that people dress, it's about the cafes. So they've created a whole experience that is Paris. London, it's a lot more about, you want to see, whether it's Hyde Park or Harrods or all the different statues and things. You could just spend weeks and weeks doing that. So it is a lot about the history. In the case of Brisbane, we've sort of got to work a little bit harder. And I mean, one thing in the future that should be about Brisbane should be Moreton Bay and Moreton Island. There's not many cities around the world that have the second largest sand island in the world.
Close by.
And I would suggest to you that probably only 1% of people in Brisbane have ever been to Moreton Island. Now, I used to go there as a kid many years ago, sort of thing. It's a fantastic place, but most people in Brisbane don't go to, let alone tourists. So that's something I think in the future you say you can come to this, world-class city, and within a couple of hours you can actually be on a wild island and have an experience. So I think that's something we're trying to get a greater focus on, Moreton Bay and Moreton Island, and of course you've got North Stradbroke Island.
Yeah.
And North Stradbroke Island has a very strong Indigenous culture with the Quandamooka people, and so there's a real potential to have a strong Indigenous story for Brisbane around Moreton Bay and the island. And of course, to take advantage of that subtropical outdoor, South Bank has been one way of doing that, and hopefully with the new casino that's going to hopefully be developed, they're going to redevelop the north side of the river, which they're calling Queen's Wharf, and you'll be able to Google that and look that up if you haven't already done that. And at the moment there are 2 companies tendering for it. And if you have a look at the sort of designs they're putting out there, and they've been in the paper, so they should be easy to find, but it's quite interesting.
Quite open.
Yeah, and particularly if you look at the one by the Jupiters Group, which the Treasury Casino Group, their building is actually quite striking, and it has something that we've been talking about for a long time that we need, and it's a big rooftop bar, garden and whatever, and what they're proposing, I think it's about 10 or 12 stories up. There's a massive one that would go out over the freeway and out over the river, and it's an open sky area which have bars and whatever, and again that's taking advantage of the river, the outdoors and whatever. So I think as we go forward, if those things come off, they may not be things that you would say, I've got to go to Brisbane, go back, but because they're there and because you come to Brisbane, they just help to create the whole experience that is Brisbane.
Okay, cool. Do you know what sort of attractions in Brisbane rack in the most income?
Well, clearly over as I was saying before, you can go to South Bank and it's free, but it's then the money that it generates. I mean, if you park your car, you've got to pay. Then you have to eat and you have a drink and those sort of things. So the magnet is the open space and whatever, and then there's plenty of ways you can spend the money. It's the same too with the cultural precinct, the gallery of modern art. Those sorts of things are all really important in terms of attracting. They make money in their own right, but then because those things keep people in Brisbane, then they stay in the hotels and they eat in the restaurants and whatever. And so those facilities are well visited. They make some money because, but a lot of it is free. Where the money's made are all the businesses that feed off them. There isn't.
That's where the shopping malls come.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. So the longer you can keep people in a destination, because there's so many different things for them to do, the more money they have to spend, because they've got to sleep somewhere and they've got to eat and they've got to drink and those sorts of things. So it's not so much about having one facility that people pay in and it makes a lot of money. It's more about the business
as a whole.
That's right. The businesses feed off all those things. It's why places like Brisbane and other cities around have events, and why you want to have festivals and events, because they attract people to come in and then they spend their money on the accommodation and the food and those sorts of things. Okay.
Do you know where the most international visitors come from?
I'd only guess because it's not my destination, but I suspect New Zealand is our biggest market for Australia and for Queensland. And I'm just having a quick look here to see. But all those figures will be in here. They'll tell you, yes, I'm right. New Zealand's is the biggest, but it will soon be overtaken by China. China's very close behind it, and then UK, USA, Germany, and then some of the other Asian countries. I mean, obviously Japan used to be a lot bigger, but it's dropped off for Eric. But yeah, at the moment, New Zealand closely followed by China.
Okay, cool. How do you really sort of satisfy the tourists here, like just with all the events and the...
Yeah, look, I think it's about understanding, and that's where our research team comes in. It's about understanding the motivations of people. Why would they want to come to a city like Brisbane, and it's about understanding what you've got to offer. A lot of cities like Brisbane are often seen as gateways. It's because the city has the international airport, people come here to go somewhere else. So traditionally Brisbane was the place you flew into because you wanted to go to the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah, but you still have to stay here.
That's right, and that was until Gold Coast then became got its own international flights, although Brisbane gets more. And the same with the Sunshine Coast, where you guys are from, is that I think just getting some flights from New Zealand now, but it's becoming international.
It's not international. Yeah.
No, so they all have to come through Brisbane, and often, depending on when the flights come, you have to stay here for a night, or people to say, we're flying into Brisbane, we'll stay there for a night. The aim, of course, of Brisbane is to get those people to stay longer and say there is more here than meets the eye. And if you are someone looking for that urban experience, we can, Brisbane then needs to sell, well, what is our urban experience? And it is about whether it's, dining at South Bank, going on a city cat down to New Farm Park, or, all these things that you can do, which all add to a city experience.
Yeah, cool. Do you know around how much income tourism, like the infrastructure, earns for Brisbane?
Again, you should find some figures in here. This should have the expenditure. So for instance, the total expenditure is 4.7 billion is the expenditure from all the forms of tourists in Brisbane. Our target for Queensland by 2020 is 30 billion to get it. So Brisbane's obviously making a fairly big contribution at 4.7 billion. But again, great set of stats there that you can use.
Is that per year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
How do you think Brisbane should sort of handle tourism in the future, like building more open areas?
I think, in other words, don't worry about competing with other places. Just focus on what our strengths are, and that might be of interest to you. But for every destination around Queensland, we've worked with them to identify what their hero experiences are. And so for Brisbane, the heroes for Brisbane are vibrant, relaxed urban outdoor lifestyle, events and culture, and nature on the doorstep. So I've touched on some of those before. So the whole vibrant, relaxed urban outdoor lifestyle, we can do that better than Sydney and Melbourne because our climate's better.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, look, Sydney's great, the Sydney Harbour and whatever, but it's a very urbanised thing where we've still got a lot of open space within our urban context. We've got the South Bank. The one around the nature of the doorstep, well, you know, you can just go up to Mount Coothy and you're out in the bush, but it is that push to try and get people down the river, out into Moreton Bay, Moreton Island, North Stradbroke Island. So that's the nature part of it, and then the events and culture. We need to do more because, you know, we've recently supported things like the Asian Cup in soccer, and the number of people that bought in. We have special Goma gets one-off events at Goma, which draws people. I think one of the ones they had at Goma, I'm just trying to think of his name, but it was women's clothing and whatever. It wasn't in Sydney and Melbourne, so on the weekends, the hotels here had their biggest turnover ever of people flying up from Sydney and Melbourne. Valentino, that wasn't in any other city. So the people came up for the weekend for a few days to see that. So events and culture are critical in terms of giving people a reason to come to Brisbane, as opposed to if you're going to go up to Cairns or Whitsundays, you're going to see the Great Barrier Reef or the rainforest, or if you're going to go to the Gold Coast, you're going there for the beaches and for the theme parks and things like that. As a city, it has to be around the lifestyle and then the events.
Okay. Is there anything that is going on like now, like you said, the casino before, like to maybe improve tourism?
That will be that will be the big change that Brisbane needs, because while the south area, the South Bank, the cultural precinct is going and is still developing, there is more new accommodation, the convention centre's been expanded.
Yeah, the north.
So it's all happening, but the north side is really just like we're here. It's commercial buildings, it's office buildings. There's more and more units going up, and there's restaurants and those sorts of things. But we need something to bring Brisbaneites back into the CBD, because you don't so much come for shopping anymore because you've got all the big shopping centres and things like that. But if that comes off and we do have the new casino, and for instance, if it was Jupiter's, they'll shut down the casino in the old Treasury building, and the old Treasury building would be turned into a high-end shopping precinct, with the likes of, Prada and all those really high-end stores, and then they would build some new accommodation, but a massive hotel with that sky, and that would really reinvigorate the city, and particularly on the north side, link up to the mall, and it would then be a place that people would come into because it's vibrant. There's lots happening. It's not just the casino earns a lot of money and helps to get the money to build all these things, but the casino is not the reason why people would come. They'll come because there's these great outdoor spaces on the river, and it's just a cool place to be. Good bars, all those sorts of things that people want to do.
Cool.
So that's probably the most critical thing for Brisbane for that project to happen.
Okay. Do you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate Brisbane's tourism infrastructure, just in your honest opinion?
I think on a world stage, I think, being honest, it's probably 6 or something like that. It's okay, but we need to. I think once that casino comes off and we get the type of development we need, I think that will push us up to a 7 and an 8 and whatever. I think when you talk about infrastructure, I think it's both the things that directly people experience, but then there's all the other things that are often not talked about. What's the public transport like? How do people get around and whatever? And we've got some real challenges in Brisbane with lots of traffic. I don't know how you guys came down this morning. Did you drive or come by train?
We went on City Hopper.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. But it's pretty. Brisbane's becoming very. I mean, I used to drive to work. I worked in this organisation for 17 years. I used to drive every day because I had a work car, but I stopped doing it because it's just too much time sitting in traffic jams and whatever, and much easier to just catch the train and whatever. So Brisbane's got some real challenges. I mean, it is trying to deal with them with the tunnels, the new tunnel they're building in the western part of the city that'll cut a lot of people going through the suburbs and that. So we need to keep improving that part of it and the public transport to make it an easy city to move around. But certainly having the city cats and things like that, that helps. But yeah, look, I think we're getting there. You know, we're getting new hotels and things like that. So I think at the moment 6 or 7, but you know, we need to do a bit more.
Yeah, okay. Do you think that any of the tourist attractions in Brisbane are as well known as some in New York or?
No, look, I think somewhere like Goma, the Gallery of Modern Art, is starting to get a good reputation as having some wonderful displays. But seriously, if you're trying to compare it to the Museum of Modern History in New York, or the Smithsonian's in Washington, or the Museum of Natural History in London or whatever. I mean, we've got a long way to go. I mean, and I think it has to be looked into the context. We're a city that's not quite 200 years old. You've got New York is probably 400 years old, and then of course London, it's over 1,000 years old. So they've got a big head start on us. We're really only a young country and a young city, and it takes a while to build those sort of things up. And plus, we just don't have the population. The resident population. Again, as I say, New York's got 8.5 million people, and we've got 2. So it's very difficult in anywhere in Australia to justify big expense on things to attract people because we just don't have the numbers to make it commercially viable. Whereas somewhere like New York with 54 million people, you build something and straight away people will start using it. Yeah.
Because it's just a bigger population. Do you know? Actually, I'll skip that question. Do you think that any major attractions is? Wait, hold on.
Up to 14.
Are there many cultural attractions in Brisbane? As a whole, does some of them have? A lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it depends how you define culture, in a sense that we've got the cultural precinct, so it's the museum. So we've got the museum, the Gallery of Modern Art, the art gallery, and then we've got the performing arts facilities there. So in that sense, in terms of contemporary culture and whatever that's there, in terms of when you're talking about culture, if you're talking about history and whatever, we could do a lot more with the Indigenous history of Brisbane. And for instance, I mean the footbridge across there that goes over to Goma is Kurilpa Bridge. Kurilpa is a language group of Aboriginal people, and that was an important site over there. So I think we could do a lot more with the Indigenous history that goes back 40,000 years. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot of historical buildings, but we've still got some good, and that's another thing. There are quite a number of historical buildings, including like the Treasury Building, the Lands Administration Building, which are currently part of the casino. And if the North Bank or Queen's Wharf, as they call it, area goes ahead, those historical buildings will be brought to life and be given a new life. At the moment, they're hidden away. You can hardly see them. They're hidden by high-rise buildings and things like that. But under this redevelopment, when they open it up,
we'll bring more people.
Yeah, and people will see them, understand the story of them. They'll be reused. They'll be used as something different. But it will bring them back to life again. And I think that's an important part of the culture of the city. But I think having a botanic gardens is really important. I think that's an underused asset, beautiful piece of open space in the city, and it's like our little Central Park. I mean, Central Park's pretty amazing in New York, and it's so much bigger. But still, having the botanic gardens, it's spectacular, and it fronts the river, which is a great advantage. So.
Yeah. Okay. I don't understand that question. I think that's basically it.
Which question is it?
16.
Which one then?
16. Do you think any major attractions in Brisbane are well known with some explanations?
Yeah. No. I think to be, as I was saying before, as opposed to having real icons, I think it's more about the overall experience it is Brisbane, and a relaxed lifestyle. I mean, the city has a tagline which is called a New World City, and often people say, well, what does that mean? But I think as we move along, we're starting to see what that means, and it's about saying, well, you can make up your own definition of a New World City, but if we're a city that, we do business, we're got lots of businesses and whatever, but we can say we do business differently than, say, Sydney and Melbourne because of our lifestyle and our outdoor lifestyle. It's a bit more casual, we aren't wearing, you're not seeing me wearing a suit and tie, I'm wearing jeans and whatever, and I do that. Now, that not everyone saw that. I still go to lots of meetings with people who've got ties and suits and everything on. That's dumb in our weather. It's just, unfortunately, you've got your jackets and your ties today. That is not surely that's not your summer uniform, is it? That's your dress uniform, is it? Yeah, so you're trying to impress me today by being good on you. Good to see. But it is about sort of saying is, if you look back in history, look at what the first settlers were wearing around in Australia. They had things buttoned up to here, and blokes were even as late as the 30s and 40s. People were wearing ties all the time. I don't know whether you're watching the Gallipoli show on TV, but all those soldiers still got ties on, and they're all very formal. Totally unsuitable for our weather. And so I think as we move forward, a New World City says, we're serious about doing business and making money and all those sorts of things and running a successful city, but we can do it with our own style. And I think that's part of not being frightened of who you are and not trying to copy. If you look at the Gold Coast developed over the last 40-odd years. They tended to copy a lot of the United States, like Miami and Palm Beach. And, the early Gold Coast run around planting palm trees and building canal estates and things like that to mimic what was going on in the US. Whereas I think you looked at Sunshine Coast, where you guys are from, I think that was a bit more resisted, and the Sunshine Coast has tried to retain more of its own character, and Calandra's got a different feel to Mooloolaba and Maroochy as it is to Noosa, each trying to retain their character a bit, their own sort of style, and not be frightened to say this is who we are, and if you're looking for this type of experience, this is what we can offer. It's not about trying to copy somebody else, because that invariably fails. If you're just trying to copy someone else all the time, you'll only ever be a copy of somebody else. You won't be yourself.
It's good to be.
And the only places that sort of get away with it are places like Las Vegas. I mean, it's this gambling thing in the middle of a desert. There was nothing there, and they built and people now go there just to gawk at it because it's weird. Bellagio fountains and fake pyramids and tigers and cave, and it's just and it's an entertainment place. It's fake and whatever, but in a sense it becomes an oddity. But it's very hard to. What only makes that work are the casinos. That's what gets the money, and keeps that city going. I think mostly if you're a location, there's an old saying, in tourism, that great places to live are great places to visit. If you think about that, if it's a great place to live and it's vibrant and people are very proud of it, then people say, I want to go there because, people love living there, and say, instead of when your friends come over and say, what's to do here, and they have nothing to do here, sort of thing, there's lots to do and it's exciting.
And obviously if they have a friend living there, they'd probably recommend it.
And
get more people.
And that's why now with social media, why places like Brisbane are getting up to number 8, because Sydney is probably spitting chips that Brisbane has beaten it in terms of being a beautiful city and whatever. But that's not us saying it, it's social media. So the visitors have gone on to social media and they've said it is. Now,
just the experience of the city.
That's right. And I think through social media now, I think we're seeing more where the consumer is saying what they like. It's not about what I say or what the mayor says or whatever. It's about what the consumer says about a place, and that's the power of social media.
Okay. Well, cool. That's all my questions. Thank you for your
pleasure.
time.
So, what else are you doing?